Señor Presidente de la Asamblea General.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, dear friend Antonio Guterres, representatives of all of the nations which are part of this organization, today as I speak to you from this rostrum, I can see that much progress has been made to achieve inclusion and accessibility. However, as a society, we still have a lot that remains to be done for the world's 1 billion people living with disabilities. I'm an optimist. We have all of the ability to find solutions. It is an issue of political will. This is why I'm grateful for the adaptations made that allow me to address this assembly today. I congratulate the President of the General Assembly, Miroslav Lajčák, for proposing the topic for this general debate, focusing on people striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet. These are truly today's imperatives. Without any doubt, a responsible government must care for its citizens so that all of them may have a decent life on a sustainable planet where we build peace every day. Our philosophy of government agrees that we must care for our citizens throughout life, from the moment of conception until the time that God decides to close our eyes. We must ensure a good life and a good death. This is why we have organized the government's work around the plan we have named A Whole Life. A responsible country and a responsible government must care for, inspire, encourage, support, and give thanks to its citizens throughout their lives under the principle of co-responsibility. First, we have the care which begins with prenatal services. After birth, we need medical care for the child, appropriate nutrition, vaccinations, neonatal screening, and early stimulation. Then there is a stage inspiring the new human being, promoting their love for science, for knowledge, for art, for sport, to shape the will and the mind, awaken sensitivities and consciousness, and planting the values which will be the basis for adult life. The next stage of life calls for essential support to boost young people with quality higher education, with the ability to develop their enterprises, their projects, and their dreams. Then we have the stage where we support the human being, ensuring the well-being of their families, the right to social security, to housing, to employment, to recreation, and to a safe and secure environment. And lastly, we have the stage of gratitude, when we give back to the people who serve society and their families. What I'm referring to is care for and attention for services for older adults. And in this vision of ensuring rights for each individual throughout life, it is also urgent to eradicate all forms of violence. Today, all of humanity has a moral and ethical duty. We must not allow thousands of women and girls to be mistreated or abused or killed. No more femicide, not one woman less. This plan for a whole life is, in a nutshell, how we in Ecuador have translated our commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. We inherit from the first peoples the notion that a world focused on the human being and their relationship with nature, where the beginning and the end satisfies the needs of all and a life with dignity. My indigenous brothers and sisters taught me that we are born to be happy, and it is on this premise that we must base ourselves to govern, to live, to administer, and to act. However, dear friends, we must also recognize that we are going through a difficult, painful time as human beings. We are facing many crises. We are seeing a potential nuclear confrontation. We see greater levels of inequality and poverty in a planet which must act against the devastating effects of climate change. If we continue along this path, There is no doubt that we are moving towards destruction. There is no doubt that this demonstrates that we are failing as a human race. We must commit ourselves to building peace. In accordance with this need, today we are signing the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and we are calling for all countries to sign this historic instrument. We know that the military industry is big business. This is why we don't understand why arms traffickers are being condemned and prosecuted, but not arms producers. What ethics are at stake? How is it possible that resources that could be devoted to finance compliance with the Sustainable Development Goals be wasted on the absurdity of war? Dear citizens of the world, we firmly believe that peace and development are built through dialogue, but if we continue with wars and blockades against countries and peoples, like the blockade against the kindred people of Cuba, we will never be able to achieve true liberty and democracy. This is why we insist that the sovereignty of states and non-intervention, non-interference be respected. We call for dialogue as a mechanism to resolve disputes in all regions of the world with full respect for international law. Militaristic build-ups are no response. They are not the answer. All they bring are suffering, pain, and death. This is why we resolutely support the peace talks taking place between the government of the Kindred Republic of Colombia with the Army for National Liberation in our country. We welcome the Quito Agreement, which was announced a few days ago for the bilateral temporary ceasefire in Colombia. Thus, step by step, we comply with the proclamation of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, of being a region of peace. As I mentioned when I began my remarks, we have another major challenge, the alarming inequality in the world. It is unacceptable for 8 people to possess the same wealth as the poorest half of humanity. This injustice goes against the right to development and human dignity. A path to face inequality urgently is to take fair tax measures. We must fight tax avoidance and evasion. These resources are vital for the development of our people. Also, the use of tax shelters has served to mask corruption, both in the public and the private sector. If we wish to fight corruption, we must encourage a culture of transparency. In our country, through popular consultation, the people of Ecuador decided that no public official may have resources or goods in tax shelters. Ecuador, as president of the G77 plus China, has pushed this global agenda forward for fair tax actions. We reiterate the need to create an intergovernmental body on tax cooperation in the United Nations. Another mechanism to encourage transparency is to have a binding instrument on transnational corporations and human rights. We are grateful for the support of all countries sharing this initiative with us. My friends, when we see the devastation caused by the climatic phenomena of recent weeks, I cannot fail to express my solidarity towards the affected peoples and refer to one of the greatest challenges that we face as a human race, the responsibility of fighting climate change. We must care for our shared home and ensure the survival of the planet. The unrestricted exploitation of nature has led us to experience the consequences of climate change, and we developing countries, without any doubt, are those paying the heaviest price. We have common but differentiated responsibilities. Those which pollute the most must take the greatest responsibility. As you are aware, Ecuador is one of the 8 Amazonian countries. Having been born and grown up in the Ecuadorean Amazonia, the Amazon area, it is my duty to encourage the protection of the greatest watershed in the world. Precisely, at the dialogue convened by the Secretary-General of the United Nations, I presented the Amazon Initiative to put a halt to deforestation and fight climate change. We call for compliance with all international agreements for the protection of nature, including the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans. We encourage bio-knowledge and the bioeconomy. Not only must we protect, but we must make the most of the knowledge of the guardians of nature, the indigenous peoples, communities, and nations. I also wish to refer to another issue of great importance for today's world, the migratory crisis. Ecuador supports the principle of universal citizenship and free mobility because we are increasingly interconnected, and the right to freedom of movement cannot only be applied to capital and merchandise. Human mobility enriches peoples and contributes to the fight against all forms of discrimination and xenophobia. We firmly support the Global Pact on Migration, which is being discussed in this House. Closing the borders is not the solution. It never has been. Never has it been the solution in the history of mankind. When I formed my government, I called for a major national dialogue without excluding anybody to reach agreements which would make it possible to construct a more humane, fair, and democratic society. Dialogue is a tool to build societies of peace. This means societies with jobs, with quality education, with access to the right to health, with decent housing, and with access to basic services. Through dialogue, we build democracy, which is both our way forward and our goal. Democracy is strengthened by generating and promoting the spaces for young people to participate in politics. We must generate new leadership so that they can take our place when the time comes. New leadership must be trained. We must uphold the defense of liberty, and especially the freedom of speech and the freedom of worship. We must encourage a new international order based on peace, the respect for differences, equality, and solidarity. We do not want compassionate societies, not compassionate societies, but societies with solidarity. And to this end, what we need is love for others, honesty, and a feeling of community. In response to the failure of the model of development based on accumulation, inequality, and war, we can and must promote a new society based on the building of the common good. Dear friends, all countries can achieve development with fairness if we have a fair international system and if we commit ourselves to eradicating poverty and inequality. We face great challenges, but I am convinced that we are able to face them. My deep optimism is rooted in the confidence that dialogue, political decision, and collective action will make it possible for us to build a more humane, more fair world where all of us will be able to live with dignity. Thank you very much.